early KK.
Mm.
Again, we live in this strange world, don't we? That especially here in South Africa, where we for IR, we are, you know, technologically savvy in many ways, and wanting to constantly keep on top of the A game in terms of technology.
Yes.
Yet we have an economy and an environment which has historically just come from a very difficult place, and we've got
Yes.
contrast between rich and poor, the haves and have-nots, and very different contexts.
Yes.
You write your books specifically for South Africa. You
Yes.
place yourself squarely in this context. So why don't you just talk us through a little bit around how your books and what you do, how are they relevant to this bipolar context that we live in South Africa?
Sure. You know, that's also I guess not just a great question, Lee, but a very personal question for me. You know, having had come from where I come from, you know, I was born on the largest citrus farm in the Southern Hemisphere, Zibidela, in Zibidela. It was called Zibidela Citrus Farm at the time. And, you know, my parents then, we moved to Ermelo, which was, you know, one of the townships, at least in Ermelo. And then I got to stay with my cousin in Polokwane, and obviously his mom and the siblings. And then we got to live in Johannesburg, or rather the eastern end of Johannesburg. And then I went to college in Johannesburg. All of these places have got such contrasting context, right? And people who come from these, you know, rural areas would typically, obviously don't have the same context as people who are born and raised in urban areas, because you get exposed to so much. And I've had the privilege of being exposed to, you know, other countries and you know, having been taught by people who have even greater context and greater experience than I do. And all of that creates context from which we then operate from. Just to bring this home even closer, someone who comes from Soweto, for example, you know, in almost all cases, we don't have the privilege of being able to eat with the entire family around the dinner table, number one. And secondly, being able to speak to our parents about what they do at work, especially, and even so, that's if our parents have jobs. And it would be so much better if our parents also had started their own businesses. Because can you imagine then the call it the lack that we have around context in terms of learning about what our parents are doing, not only at work, but in the business. And so we don't have that context. We don't grow up with that context. And so it was important for me to be able to bridge that gap in the books that I write, is to create that context. Yes, you may come from this place. Maybe this is what you've missed out on, right? But if you have that context, okay, maybe skip this section and go to that section. So if I feel that if I had missed out on providing that context, my books would continue to not make sense to a great majority of the readers, at least, and those who will want to take up that book. Because there's so many of my readers are actually first-time entrepreneurs. You know, they're first-generation entrepreneurs in their families. And so it was really important for me to play that part, because I believe I was a little luckier, because one of my uncles and my grandfather had started their own shops as well. So, you know, I got to see it a little bit. I didn't learn from it. I didn't learn about it, but I got to see it. But as I grew up, I had more context than those who start their businesses in their mid-20s and later. So it was really important to create that context. I think it helps to bridge that gap.
Thanks, KK. What I appreciate about your books is that while you provide that context, and therefore it's easy to understand that they are not simplistic. So
Yes.
they take into account the processing that the individual themselves need to do in order to
Yes.
apply. So although the South African context in all its various dynamics are taken into account, anybody at any point in their business would still get value from your books.
I agree. I agree.
I think that comes through very strongly.
And then just talking about that quickly,
Yes.
you know, there's a chief financial officer of a listed company who contacted me last week. So we're talking about something, and he says a few weeks ago he bought my book. He bought the A Game Business Blueprint, and he says he got so many nuggets from it. And you know, it was such a proud moment for me. I'm like, wow, you're a CFO of a listed company, and you were able to pick up those nuggets from that book. So again, just to echo your words, you know, somebody, you know, people will always be able to have something that they can pick up and learn from the book. And they're not shallow concepts. We go deep. We ask people to go a couple of levels deeper in order, you know, for them to really take something out that they can utilize and